Good evening. My name is Susan Drodge, and I am the Director of Advancement here at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's Alumni Networking and Education Series event. Thank you all for being here. Our topic tonight is vaccines in a time of COVID, the pharmacy perspective. This webinar is part of our Alumni Networking and Education Series and is brought to you by the Office of Advancement here at our faculty. This series provides you, our valued alumni and friends, with relevant, thought-provoking presentations and discussions on the current hot topics in pharmacy and pharmacy practice. We're always looking for ideas to cover, so please feel free to connect with myself or Tara O'Leary, our Manager of Alumni Relations, on topics you'd like to hear more about in the future. Before we start this evening, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of Indigenous people and remains home for Indigenous people across Turtle Island. We are grateful for the opportunity to work on this land. It's now my pleasure to introduce Natalie Crown, who will be our moderator for this evening's discussion. Natalie is the acting director of the pharmacy program and assistant professor in the teaching stream at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy. She completed her BSc Pharm at Dalhousie University, a pharmacy practice residency program at the Queen Elizabeth II Health Sciences Center in Halifax, and her post-baccalaureate PharmD at the University of Toronto. Natalie has almost 20 years of practice experience in both inpatient hospital pharmacy practice and ambulatory care. She also serves as the director of the pharmacy residency program at Women's College Hospital. At the faculty, Natalie teaches in the Doctor of Pharmacy and Master of Science pharmacy programs. In the PharmD program, she coordinates injections and immunizations training for our Doctor of Pharmacy students. I'll now turn it over to Natalie to introduce tonight's panel. Natalie?
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone and our alumni community. I'm honored to serve as your moderator this evening alongside this incredibly talented group of panelists with a wealth of experience that spans pharmacy practice, academia, industry, and professional advocacy. And I will, like Susan, begin with some introductions. All of our panelists have really impressive and long bios, hence long bios, but I'm going to take a moment to highlight a few details that are related to their current roles and our job here this evening. So I'll start with Linda Dresser, and if you could give a wave, Linda. Linda Dresser is an assistant professor at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy, and her area of expertise is infectious diseases and antimicrobial stewardship. Currently, she is involved with an organization that volunteers to answer COVID-19 vaccine-related questions from the public, and she's actually part of the planning related to our faculty's role in a vaccine clinic here at U of T. Linda received her BSc Pharm from the University of Toronto. After completing a hospital practice residency at McMaster University Medical Center in Hamilton, Ontario, she moved to Hamilton, Bermuda, to practice until she was voted off the island. And we won't have time for that story tonight. Linda then pursued her PharmD degree from Wayne State University in Detroit, followed by a fellowship in infectious disease pharmacotherapy, pharmacokinetics, and pharmacoeconomics in Buffalo. And her academic interests include antimicrobial prescribing behavior change. So welcome, Linda. Moving on next to Anna Taddio, and Anna, wave to the group. Anna is a professor at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy. Her research focuses on pain during medical procedures in children, including the impact of untreated pain and the effectiveness and safety of different pain interventions. She currently leads a national interdisciplinary team that is studying and promoting evidence-based pain mitigation during vaccination, which is called HELP in Kids and Adults. The team's 2015 clinical practice guidelines about reducing pain, fear, and fainting has been integrated into national immunization policy and was adopted by the World Health Organization. Dr. Taddio has published over 160 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters and is the recipient of several prestigious awards, which I can't list them all tonight, but she's currently leading research aimed at improving the vaccination experience in order to support vaccination, including COVID-19 vaccination. Welcome, Anna. Next, we have Ayman Chit. Ayman is a vice president with Sanofi Pasteur, where he heads up the medical department in the international region. In this role, he is building and leading a new medical team in this region. Through his career, Ayman has worked across multiple departments in industry, including market access, research and development, and medical affairs. Outside of industry, Ayman keeps an active academic affiliation, teaching and supervising graduate students as an assistant professor at the University of Toronto's Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy. Ayman holds an honors bachelor degree in chemistry, a master's in biotechnology, and a doctoral degree in health economics, all from the University of Toronto. His doctoral thesis was focused on the economics of vaccine development, and he's also authored over 65 publications focused on vaccines and infectious diseases. So welcome, Ayman. And last but certainly not least, welcoming Shelita Dattani. Shelita received her Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy from Northeastern University and her Doctor of Pharmacy degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Shelley is a pharmacist with over 20 years experience in many sectors of the profession, including community, hospital, academia, industry, group purchasing organizations, and professional associations. For the past several years as Director of Professional Affairs at the Canadian Pharmacists Association, Shelita led a team responsible for practice development, research, knowledge mobilization, and pharmacy practice issues to support the advancement of our profession. Her team responded nimbly to many practice issues related to COVID-19, underscoring her leadership and significant contributions to the sector. Shelita is currently the Vice President of Pharmacy Affairs with Neighbourhood Pharmacy Association of Canada. So welcome, everyone. Our focus this evening will be on some of the current issues for pharmacists and pharmacy professionals related to COVID-19 vaccination, including how we can contribute as public health advocates, educators, and immunizers. So we have a series of questions for our panelists that we will move through, and then we will have time at the end of the session to take questions from our audience. So without further ado, and blessings from our panel, I'm just going to get right into it and start with our first question. Our first question this evening is for Linda Dresser. And Linda, I mean, it goes without saying that the COVID-19 pandemic is constantly evolving, and we are all continually trying to digest new information. It feels like hour by hour and day by day. So today is February 24th, and what are the top 3 things you think pharmacists should know in our role as public health advocates and immunizers about COVID-19 and the vaccines? Oh, you're on mute, Linda.
Thanks, Natalie. We had to have at least one of those moments tonight. Yeah, there'll be more. So 3 things. I think that's a great way to put it. And I also like that you put in the context of today. So I'm going to start with what I think is the good news. I think the good news is that we have the vaccines and they're here, and all those that are available have globally demonstrated not only real world safety, but also now some data on effectiveness as well. So millions and millions of doses have been administered in more than 100 countries globally, with enough people in some countries to see that the vaccine is demonstrating efficacy with a decrease in number of cases, a decrease in number of outbreaks, and a decrease in number of deaths. And even here in Ontario, we've seen that with having a lot of the long-term care facility residents vaccinated. We have seen a great decrease in number of cases in the long-term care facility, as long with outbreaks and deaths. So I think that's great news. They make a difference, and they really are an important piece of mitigating and ultimately eradicating the pandemic. However, I think that brings me to point number 2, which is that the vaccines can't do it on their own. So we still need to have strong public health measures. They continue to be an integral part of our ongoing response to the pandemic. And even if a person has been vaccinated, we have to continue to use masks, social distance, good hand hygiene, and that's essential. And for a couple of reasons. One is that we know the vaccines, like many other vaccines, they'll prevent illness due to the infection, and they, in this case, also will prevent death, but they don't necessarily prevent the ability to transmit if you were to become infected. So you could still potentially become infected, but you don't get sick, but you could still potentially transmit the infection to someone else. And so I think that's really important thing to take into consideration. So even though the vaccines are rolling out, we still need to continue to have all these public health measures in place. And even though we're seeing that decrease, we don't have enough people vaccinated in order to shift away from that. And in fact, we're still seeing at least 1,000 cases a day here in Ontario, and that unfortunately translates into a number of patients that are hospitalized. And right now, I think we have about 600 people hospitalized in Ontario, with almost 200 people receiving mechanical ventilation. And, although a lot of people recover from COVID-19, 1 in 39 people in Canada have in fact died from COVID-19 who have been infected. So I think that's something that we really need to keep into this context. And to date, there is no curative therapy. So prevention is our best approach. And in addition, this sort of brings me to my last point, which is that we have the variants of concern. So the variants of concern first really sort of emerged in November of last year and come to our attention. And in Canada, we have at least 3 that have been identified as circulating. The one most commonly identified in Canada is the B.1.1.7 variant, the one that was initially identified in the UK. And this variant, although the vaccines are effective against it, we don't have enough people, as I said, immunized. And so we are in a precarious situation where these variants could now tip us over into a new wave. So I think that's it. My 3 points: the vaccines are working, but we still need to continue other measures. Greater than, less than 1,000 cases a day is good news, but it's not good enough. It's still way too many. And we're at a tipping point with the variants of concern.
Thanks, Linda. Sorry, I was just unmuting as well. So maybe just thank you for those comments. And just to follow up on your point related to the variants of concern, I think you mentioned, like vaccines being effective, we still need the public health measures, but there is these emerging variants. And so, can you comment on how you think the new variants will impact, I guess, not only our public health situation, but the vaccine efficacy, or what do we know about vaccine efficacy in these variants of concern?
Well, breaking news, as we know, something new happens every minute in the COVID public domain of new information. The Moderna vaccine has just entered into new clinical trials with a newly developed vaccine against one of the variants of concern. So that is something exciting. But the simple answer to your question is that I think the potential impact of the variants of concern in Canada is significant, and for a couple of reasons. They're called variants of concern because they're of concern due to their nature of being different from the wild type strain in a way that gives them an edge over some sort over the wild type strain. And variants emerge during replication over a prolonged period of time and are expected. Like, we see viruses do this all the time. And currently we talk about 3 different variants of concern, but there are many more variants of concern that are out there that just haven't been recognized yet, or haven't shown up in at least in our population. So I think they are going to be a major impact. Of the 3 currently, the B.1.1.7, as I mentioned, is the one that's most prevalent. And what it's characterized by is an increased ability to transmit, at least a 50% greater transmissibility, which in turn leads to more infections, which in turn leads to more hospitalizations, and unfortunately to more deaths. It also may have the ability to cause more severe disease, and that's a problem. So we can control it, but it takes a lot of hard, dedicated work by everyone to maintain really good vigilance to the public health measures. We really need to up our mask game. We need to social distance, stay home. And if we don't, it's going to explode in a population, and it's going to explode rapidly and easily. And I can put that into context for you. 2 weeks ago, the B.1.1.7 variant of concern was approximately 5% of all the isolates identified in Ontario. This week, it's up to 15 to 18%, and may in fact be higher when the new data for the week is released earlier or later this week. And in another couple of weeks, it will be the predominant circulating strain. Today in Quebec, the number of cases involving a variant of concern increased by 24%. In Denmark, a country that's done a really great overall job of controlling the pandemic, 7 weeks ago, it was 4% of their strains or their isolates. Now it's greater than 57%. So just in a 6-week period, it has increased that much. So I think in a country that has strong public health controls, we can see that even there, once it takes hold, it explodes. So it's good news, but that the vaccines work and they do have effectiveness against the wild type strain. To date, they all have effect against these variant strains. There are new vaccines being developed to target specifically the new variants of concern. And I think they are going to be a huge impact.
Okay, thanks, Linda. And maybe that transitions us nicely into a question that I have for Ayman related to vaccines and vaccine development. And I guess is something that a lot of people are wondering about is how did these vaccines get developed in such record speed? And we are hearing just from Linda that vaccine development is going to have some ongoing importance. So how did they get developed in such record speed? And I think many pharmacists here tonight are probably wondering what they can tell their patients when they are asked that same question.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie, for that question. And thank you for those nice introductory comments, Linda, around the virus. And yeah, this is it's an RNA virus. It's sort of similar to flu in that sense. So it mutates. Now, why did we get so lucky to develop a vaccine so quickly? Well, one of the things we got lucky with is this virus, even though it is an RNA virus and it mutates like the flu, it's a much slower mutator, relatively speaking. So it's in a sense a more sophisticated virus. It's able to self-correct, so it's less prone to error compared to the flu. Another feature of the virus we really got lucky with is this unique feature in the surface, which is called the spike protein, where corona gets its name from, right? So this is a critical protein that helps the virus penetrate cells, and basically it's an essential step in the pathogenesis of this virus, on the mechanism of the action. So this one protein is fundamental to the function of the virus. It's more stable than flu viruses, so it doesn't vary as much or at the same rate. The other thing about it is that it's kind of distinct and available on the surface. Other viruses have, you don't get as lucky. For instance, you may have other viruses that have sugar molecules stuck on the proteins on the surface. So this is a virus that actually has a distinct, three-dimensional structure that is important to its function, without camouflage, if you like, without a lot of interfering proteins or other molecules like sugars on the surface that may make it harder to recognize by the body. So based on that, we're seeing now, we hypothesize that we would see a fairly strong and highly specific immune response to this virus, and indeed that's kind of panning out in all the clinical data we're able to see. So there was a little bit of luck there. But also, aside from the luck factor, is that there have been a long-standing government, especially the U.S. government. I think it's really critical to appreciate the investments the U.S. government has made in pandemic preparedness. So, for instance, give you a few examples to help you understand this. So, Moderna, one of the major companies that have been successful with the mRNA vaccine, has received substantial amounts of BARDA funding that enabled them to develop the base technologies that they have and enter into the clinic rapidly without having to worry about raising money. So there was a lot of money poured in, and it wasn't only Moderna. Many other companies enjoyed some kind of a major incentive, particularly from the U.S. government in terms of clinical trial funding. So basically, BARDA and the U.S. government stepped up and told major vaccine, the people that had candidates around the world, look, finding money to do these large-scale trials is a non-issue. Just let us know what you want, and it was basically all funded, which is really spectacular. To take the funding, and even for companies that, like, for instance, Pfizer and BioNTech didn't take the clinical trial funding part of BARDA, but BARDA also introduced in the U.S. government a very, very strong pull mechanism where, and this wasn't just the U.S. government, many governments like the European Union, COVAX, Canada, they stepped up and they did purchase commitments, which is a very strong incentive. That means that you take your sales risk out. So, governments were saying, look, if you can get into a regulatory approval, we guarantee you we will buy X amount of doses. So these strong push and pull mechanisms, the push one, which is paying for the clinical research, came mostly from the vast majority of it came from the US government. And the pull mechanism, still the bulk of it came from the US, but also Europe and a few other companies stepped up. This really takes off a lot of the business risk from companies that are entering the race, which kind of takes away your downside, allows you just to focus on doing the experiments you need. The third thing to note about why we have a vaccine so quickly is that the mRNA technologies worked spectacularly well. And our ability to translate them into SARS-CoV-2 vaccines was facilitated because specifically Moderna and Pfizer, BioNTech, the biotech that works with Pfizer, so Moderna and BioNTech had been working on the side. These are mainly immunotherapeutic companies that had small vaccine projects on the side. But it just happened that those small vaccine projects were focused on SARS outbreaks, or MERS outbreaks, which is the same family of viruses. So they already had some experience coding up the mRNA and preparing some level of batches that was used mostly in animal tests. So they had animal tests against the sister virus. So the know-how was able to transfer right away towards this. So, we got into human testing right away. And the mRNA technology has a nice feature, which it's much easier chemistry to work with than proteins and viral, growing viruses the traditional way. So the scalability of this thing was facilitated through this type of technology. And this pandemic, unfortunately, raging the way it is right now, allowed us to test at scale very quickly. So, we were recruiting a tremendous amount of volunteers in industry pretty easily. Like within a week, you would see a 30,000 trial fully enrolled, which is really spectacular. And unfortunately for people, unfortunate for the technology, these volunteers were then put out so we were able to measure safety very effectively given the large scale trials, but the efficacy was easy to test because within a week, given the force of infection, within a few weeks after vaccination, you were able to see who got cases and who didn't. And with these vaccines being very effective, it was quite clear that, I think it's spectacular that the Moderna and Pfizer trials reported no serious cases of COVID in the vaccinated people, zero. There was barely any clinical cases detected. However, the placebo arm was seeing the community-based rate. So, that's a little bit as to sort of how we got there so quickly. And the safety profile was fairly clean, that's a little bit of a background there.
Thanks, Ayman. So I think that was really helpful in understanding of all the facilitators that helped us get this vaccine so quickly. And I guess in follow-up, that's the good news, the collective effort, the luck, the features about the virus, the fact that this mRNA, research was already happening and that was established, as you so nicely described. Can you tell us about some of the biggest challenges of vaccine development? So I guess we're focusing on the challenges of vaccine development for COVID-19, both as it relates to vaccines coming to the market and future vaccine development.
Yes, so there's two. So one of them is, Linda just alluded to. So now it's like a little bit like the flu. So this is an RNA virus that continues to mutate. So we need to keep up with it. It's actually, we have some experience doing that with the flu against a virus that mutates much faster. So there is some infrastructure to sort of coordinate and get a consensus on which variants of concern to develop a vaccine against. So that infrastructure that was used for flu now is amenable for COVID, okay? Global surveillance centers and already a meeting structure where global partners can get together and decide which are the most critical strains or variants of interest we need to develop against. But still, getting that done is still one of the challenges that we have, okay? How does it that you update this vaccine? The other challenge that we have is, so there's been a few vaccines now that have reached the marketplace, right? But the supply capacity is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is a vaccine that really has, a demand from people around the world. Every single person on the planet potentially qualifies. You're talking, the global population would potentially require a vaccine like this. So, you need multiple vaccines to arrive so that you can meet this public health demand that's out there. Now, okay, so let's think about this, right? So if you can access a vaccine, why would you enroll in a trial and have the chance of receiving a placebo? And if not a placebo, another vaccine that may not work, an experimental one, if you can just go to the public health center and get your vaccine. So there is going to be and these are sort of at this point in time, that's less of a concern, but by the summer it's going to be more of a concern. By the end of the year, it's going to be a big issue to do sort of large-scale efficacy experiments for future candidates. So this is another challenge. I mean, it's not something we can't overcome. There is some strategies that we can do to overcome that, but it is one of the challenges that industry thinks about quite a bit when trying to develop other candidates in this space. So you become a little bit of a victim of your own success here.
Right. Not a bad problem to have always, but yeah, in this case, certainly something to think about as we move into the summer and fall. So thank you so much, Ayman, for that really great description of the development and some of the current issues related to the vaccines. And so now I'm going to pivot to Anna, and I know we touched on one question that the public has, I think specifically related to vaccines, which is how we got them so quickly, a little bit about the technology. And so I wanted to ask you, as Canada is embarking on its largest vaccination campaign in history, can you tell us about some of the potential reasons for vaccine hesitancy or vaccine mistrust amongst Canadians?
Hi everyone. Hi, Natalie. It's great to be on this panel. So that is a great question and a very complicated one too. So just to start off, I'm sure most people have heard about vaccine hesitancy. And if they didn't hear about it before, it has existed long before the COVID-19 vaccine has been available or has been developed. So we've been talking about vaccine hesitancy for a number of years. And in fact, people may also be aware that the WHO named vaccine hesitancy as one of the threats to global health in 2019. And it's sort of unfortunate now that we're actually seeing this come to fruition, or there's the possibility that it will actually very negatively impact on the pandemic. So to just define vaccine hesitancy, in case it's not clear for everyone, it's about people delaying or refusing vaccinations when they're available. So there have been a number of studies done specifically in Canadians about COVID-19 and people's readiness and sort of willingness, acceptability to get vaccinated. And overall, about 60 or 70% of Canadians say that they're likely to accept the vaccine if it's offered to them. And that may sound like a really good number, but we're not quite sure how high a number we need to achieve community immunity. And of course, we want as many people protected as possible. So it's not as impressive maybe as what we'd like it to be. But when we look at what the general issues are or the major concerns are, they have to do with the same kind of issues that people have with other vaccines, in the sense that they have to do with safety of the vaccine. So people are worried about how safe it is, maybe about the side effects related to vaccine, how well it works. And some of the new things about COVID-19 vaccines specifically have to do with how quickly they were developed. So what Ayman was talking about, how were we able to achieve this? Because normally we don't have vaccines available so quickly. So those are kind of the major issues that are coming up in the research with COVID-19 vaccine and people's concerns about it, which don't sound much different from what concerns are when other vaccines are available. So again, to talk about like what Linda was saying, what the good news is we can help people navigate the information sources and get a clearer picture or understanding about these issues. So there's so much information, as we know, about COVID everywhere, and not all the information is the same. And so part of the challenge, I think, that we can certainly help to address is how people navigate through this and how they actually pull out the relevant information to help them with whatever the issue is that they're facing or that they're concerned about. So that's a big point to pull out about vaccine hesitancy, is that people may have different concerns. So it's not like everybody's worried about the same thing and a cookie cutter answer is going to alleviate their concerns. It's our job if we are talking to people about concerns about vaccination, find out what really the underlying issue is and then sort of address that specifically. So I would say we are in a good position in the sense that we have information that can help people with what seem to be sort of the major concerns, but that certainly is not everything, and the context is important. So different communities also have different issues that we need to address in a different way, not necessarily as individuals, but using a more program approach or some, high level community-based approach rather than individual intervention. So I think that's really an important point to pull out too, Natalie. We can't solve everybody's problems with just kind of talking about them.
Yeah, and so related to that point, Anna, as new information about COVID continues to be made available, I guess you've touched on this a little bit, but do you feel the causes or reasons for hesitancy is changing, or are there COVID specific issues that we should be considering?
Yeah, so that's great. In general, vaccine hesitancy is context specific. So it varies across time, across place, across vaccines. So different issues for different people at different times. And for COVID specifically, again, getting back to the kind of infodemic and the new information that changes on a daily basis, for some people, they're actually paying attention to all of this information, sort of hanging on every word. Other people are just zoning out and not really paying attention because it's too stressful. And depending on what they're hearing, it can magnify, make hesitancy worse, or it can actually reduce it. So let's think about what Linda was talking about with respect to the variants. If there are variants, if they are causing more serious disease, if this is becoming more contagious, for some people, that may keep COVID at the forefront of their mind so that they're concerned, they see it as relevant, and they see it as very threatening. So this will be a motivator for them to get vaccinated. For others, however, if they hear about what we're hearing on the news about the differences potentially in the effectiveness of the different vaccines, and there's some confusion about some aspects of things, concerns that they may have had addressed may resurface, or new concerns may arise, right? So it can go in all different directions, but certainly the concern is if the hesitancy increases, then less people are likely to get vaccinated, which means we're going to have more difficulty stopping the pandemic, and there's going to be more lives lost, and there's going to be serious consequences in terms of, the public health measures that are being taken now, and people's lives really being restricted in terms of what they can do and what they can't do. So it can go in different ways, Natalie. For us, I think the important thing is to really try to meet people where they're at and help them to have more confidence in getting vaccination. So to provide a sort of, shall I say, bigger picture. So with all this little, information about this, information about that, is to bring people up and kind of remind them at a high level, like what Linda said, what is the impact of the disease? How many people actually die when they get the disease? How many people are actually coming up to have long-term sequelae? And then kind of balancing that with the vaccine and the safety of the vaccine, the effectiveness of the vaccine, and trying to kind of not pay attention always to the little details and look at the bigger picture, because in this space, there's few people who actually have the expertise to follow all the details, and they can find this very confusing. So for us to kind of bring them down to earth and kind of put things in perspective, I think might be helpful so that people have that reassurance that overall the vaccines are safe, they're effective, and it's better to get the vaccine and have that protection than to put yourself at risk and others of getting the disease.
Thanks for that, Anna. Maybe I'll get you to think specifically, and you've touched on this, but what you see the role of pharmacists, especially those in the community who are so accessible, in educating the public about COVID-19 vaccination to help build vaccine trust.
Right. I think actually pharmacists are having a key role right now. If they weren't in the spotlight before, they certainly are now. They are the most accessible healthcare providers. So they're the ones who are seeing patients. They're the ones who are already fielding questions about COVID vaccination. And so they have that opportunity to promote and be advocates of the vaccine. So it's not like we don't have a history of helping people with vaccination. We've always educated, so we've always had a role if people had questions in the pharmacy to talk to them about vaccinations and to recommend vaccinations. But we've also facilitated vaccinations. So we've hosted vaccine clinics that public health has done. And then more recently, we've become immunizers. So we've actually delivered vaccinations, and we've had a positive impact on vaccine uptake, as probably everyone's aware. We haven't just shifted vaccine services from physicians and from public health. We've actually also led to a net increase in the number of vaccines that are being taken up. So the next step is for us to be proactive and actually recommend vaccination. So wherever there's an opportunity to be able to ask people, when are you getting your COVID vaccine? When are you getting your COVID vaccine? I think we should do that. And for some people, that little nudge, that just reassurance that you think it's a good idea is going to be enough for them to say, okay, you know what, this person thinks it's a good idea. I trust them. And so that's the other part of it is, you know, still at the end of the day, with all the information that's available and all the places people can go to get information, healthcare providers are still considered the primary source or the most trusted source of information. So this has borne out in research with vaccinations in general and is likely the case and looks like it is the case for COVID vaccines as well. So in surveys that are ongoing that have been done, people are still looking to healthcare providers for the recommendation, should I get vaccinated? So we can certainly step up there and provide vaccinations, and people will be likely to accept them. A part of that, I think, though, also means that we need to believe in the vaccines ourselves. So if we get vaccinated, then we're much more likely to be strong advocates of the vaccine than if we're not vaccinated. So on an individual level or personal level, if people have their own concerns about vaccination, it's great to be able to have supports or resources to help people to be more confident with getting vaccinated, so then they can more effectively vaccinate or counsel their patients to be vaccinated. And then having that information available, I think, is great, which is something that the Public Health Agency of Canada is working on. They are developing toolkits for healthcare providers to not only address their issues with the vaccine, and there are some, it looks like, slightly different concerns that healthcare providers might have compared to the public, but these resources are being created for both. So for the healthcare provider to improve their confidence with being vaccinated and then improve their confidence with counseling patients, and then for patients to have credible sources of information. So I think overall, pharmacists can go the next step and be more proactive with recommending vaccines. And a lot of the patients, if not the majority, will go along with that recommendation. And pharmacists need to have access to credible sources of information so they feel confident to be able to do that. So if they do need to embark on conversations where people start to ask them questions, that they do feel like they can help and they can answer some questions. They can talk a little bit about how come it was possible for us to create these vaccines so quickly. What is the risk of side effects? What does that look like? How can we prevent that? So if they feel like that they can do that effectively, then they'll be more likely to have those conversations and be able to improve that vaccination rate.
Thanks, Anna. That's great. And you mentioned resources, and we'll come back to that, I think, later, a little bit later. But I wanted to turn it over to Shelley, who I know you have a national lens on this, and we've talked about, role of the pharmacist in this a little bit. So we know there's a lot of work happening right now in terms of preparing for vaccine rollout in more of a community setting, and lots of work happening at vaccine planning tables. So I'm just wondering if you want to comment on how pharmacy professionals will be involved in delivering the COVID-19 vaccine, and if you have a sense of, different regions, that would be helpful too.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. And thanks again for having me on the panel as well. I'm a fangirl of many of you, so I'm so happy to be on a panel with Linda Dresser, who I've admired for many, many years, and now I get to be next to her. How fun. Yes, I do have a national lens on this, and this is really my day-to-day right now. So your first question, I think, was How do pharmacy professionals get involved? And pharmacy professionals are already involved, right? So they're already in acute care, in mass clinics, in their local public health units in various ways, whether they're educating or actually jabbing in the arm, they're already involved. But yes, it is a very rapid evolving discussion across the country right now. And as you said, Natalie, it is going to differ regionally, as healthcare always does in this country. It's like we have 10 different countries and 2 territories, and everybody does something slightly differently. So it is a very big policy discussion that everybody is having at all of the different tables. Some of the provinces are already engaging pharmacies and pharmacy professionals as early as March, it's February 24th. That's 6 days away. Today, hot off the presses, I don't know if anyone saw this, but just at about, I think 2:30 or 3 o'clock Mountain Time, for example, Alberta released their plan. They have, I think patients, they're sort of phase 2, like 75 and older patients. They already have more than 100 participating pharmacies who will be starting as early as 2 weeks in 3 cities, I think, in Alberta to start with, and then it will broaden after that. Other provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, also have a plan for pharmacies. Some of the logistics aren't fully worked out yet, but in some of those provinces, pharmacies are already able to register if they're interested in being part of their campaign. And often it's those who have already participated in influenza campaigns, which in most of the country is a fairly large proportion of pharmacies. So as I said, the phase 2 sort of stage, and it sort of means different things in different jurisdictions. But as you get outside of the long-term care communities, like Linda said, where we've successfully immunized lots of people, and you start thinking about, my mom, who is like a little bit older and hopefully going to get an opportunity in the next few weeks outside of long-term care. So older patients, higher risk populations. We know that in Ontario, things are still being shaped, but we do know that it is going to be truly pharmacy professionals. So not just pharmacists, but very exciting this year, regulated pharmacy technicians will be immunizing against COVID. And as we speak, many of them are getting trained as certified immunizers across the province. Some, again, students and interns will also be involved. Students have been involved with flu before, so it's not a new thing, but it's exciting to say that we have a broad team that can be involved. And as I said before, from an Ontario perspective, there are many pharmacists across the province now who at various levels are very actively engaged with their public health units, and they are part of those teams, whether, to Anna's point, they are building confidence, which is a big, big part of the role that everyone should be embracing right now before they're jabbing an arm. They also may be administering. So in other provinces that I haven't mentioned, the roles are still being defined and shaped. Some provinces have prototype clinics that are being set up. Some might have pharmacy professionals supporting sort of more of these super sites or mass vaccination clinics, and really start with that until supply really ramps up in the spring and early summer. We have lots of arms that we need to get needles in, right, across this country. So ultimately, I think the key piece, though, is that pharmacy's real value is the accessibility that we have. And we like to say that across the country, you're within 5 kilometers of a pharmacy. We know that model worked well with influenza. We know that, pharmacies can do 3 million vaccines a week in this country, 1 million per week just in Ontario. And of course, this is all dependent on supply, like Ayman said to us. Until we have more readily available supply in this country, we won't see pharmacies fully leveraged. Even if they have plans, they may be in pilot stages or sort of soft launch stages. So, having said that, though, as I said, we're in lots of different active discussions, and we do feel that once vaccine becomes more available for that vast, you and me, Natalie, and Linda and Ayman, you'll hopefully be able to go to your community pharmacy and get that vaccine, get those economies open, build that herd immunity that we need to get back to the normalcy that we all crave so much. So that's not just pharmacy, it's primary care, which is defining its role. It's public health. It's all of us. To me, it's anybody who has the scope of practice to do an IM injection could potentially be involved as long as we have supply. And just I wanted to say something else too, Natalie, in terms of capacity. So just I think it's important to reflect on this past flu season. And many of you have heard people say this was a dress rehearsal for COVID because it was the highest demand flu season probably ever. People who had never gotten a flu shot were getting one this year. And we administered collectively 5.6 million flu shots in pharmacy, which is a record across the country. And in many provinces like Alberta, they immunized 80% of all people who got their flu shots in Alberta, which is pretty phenomenal. So, there's capacity, there's training, there's more people to the team to bring. So I think that's exciting.
Thanks, Shelly. And that leads into I think you highlighted, community pharmacies, like we've been doing this, community pharmacists have been doing this and doing this successfully for some time. And as you mentioned, like the vaccine supply is a problem right now, but once it starts rolling, it can roll. There's a potential for this to roll out really quickly. And so, with that in mind and knowing that community pharmacists have been leading successful flu campaigns, as you mentioned, this year, despite many challenges, including supply, including competing demands, including included providing COVID-19 testing and care to patients during a pandemic. What logistics do you think community pharmacists need to consider, or are in the planning phases about implementing COVID-19 vaccination in the community site?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Natalie, and it's definitely something to continue to build upon. As you said, there's lots of things happening. So, as I said, we already have sort of the expertise and the ability and the infrastructure. And even with this flu season, you saw more people adopting an appointment-based model, which was a little bit of a paradigm shift, right? For us in pharmacy in the fall, getting used to making appointments for patients and not having as many. Sure, there were still walk-ins. If that patient's going to walk in and get their shot, you want to grab them when they're ready, but a good hybrid of appointment-based and walk-in. So I think that's one thing, is thinking about the model of care. And I think we will see a lot of that moving forward is this appointment-based type of system. And we may see it for COVID, we may see it for other things as well. The other thing that we have and that we hope that we can leverage, and we've been able to leverage in many provinces with flu, is we have a different supply chain. So we have a distribution model through a wholesaler that supports pharmacy services every day with medication distribution, but we also have the ability to also distribute influenza vaccine in many provinces through that model. We also have the cold chain capacity. In terms of other logistical considerations, as we all know, Pfizer is an ultra frozen vaccine. So this is a little bit different, right, from the cold chain requirements of other drugs. And that's got to be coordinated as well, and may not be as much of a player in community pharmacy. We don't want to have any waste, obviously, and we have short windows, longer windows for the other mRNA and then future vaccines. We did a readiness survey at Neighbourhood pharmacies and CPHA. We did a joint survey together. From that joint survey, we said we could actually immunize 40 patients per pharmacy per day and also keep doing everything else. So as you mentioned, there's always the everything else, right? So, and we worry about that, but we're hearing that we can do this, the way we've changed our models, the way we can bring in more staff on the teams. And this is like up to 3 million doses per week, assuming that we have the supply support and we have all of the things that we need to do that. The vast majority of pharmacies and pharmacists want to do that and think that they can do that. I mean, other things that are coming down the pike, as I said, we're already sort of used to scheduling patients to getting their flu shot. We will need to be scheduling people now, and we will need to be scheduling them for a 2-dose regimen and making sure that we are, we can talk about that a little bit later. That gets into some of the hesitancy issues, as well as making sure, if they're not feeling well, or if they have that sort of, like I like to say, expected immune response from that first dose, and it might take some convincing to get them back inside that window as those windows get longer. Documentation is going to be really important. In some provinces, there are new centralized sort of registry types of documentation systems. Like in Ontario, there's one. In Alberta, they already have a centralized ability to do this. PPE is always a concern, and infection control. But I think that there's a lot we've been sort of practicing for a while. And I think there are a lot of elements of infrastructure that have already changed or beginning to change, so that we're probably more poised than we would have been if we didn't have the flu season to sort of prepare and be a bit of a catalyst.
Thanks, Shelly. So I'm going to move on to some questions about vaccines, like in certain populations. And Linda, we know that pharmacists are getting a lot of questions about vaccines in patient populations that maybe weren't included in the COVID vaccine trials, and they want to be prepared to address them. So hoping we have some time to talk about a few of them this evening. And maybe I'll just start with the first one, which is, what do we know about COVID-19 vaccines in people who are pregnant?
Yeah, Natalie, that's a very common question, and a great one to have everybody think about. So as Natalie said, we're talking about populations that weren't necessarily included in the clinical trials of the vaccines, whether we're talking about the mRNA clinical trials or any of the other vaccine trials. Pregnant and breastfeeding women were not included. And so a number of organizations, including the Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology of Canada and many other countries, as well as the National Advisory Board or National Advisory Committee for Immunizations in Canada, have put out statements regarding this specific patient population. And the recommendation is that the vaccine should be offered to pregnant women and or breastfeeding women who are at particularly high risk of contracting COVID infection or at risk of having severe complications. And for any pregnant women, it is something that should be discussed and a shared decision reached. So being pregnant and or breastfeeding is not an absolute contraindication to receiving the vaccine. It is an important part of care for that individual, and it definitely should be offered in certain situations. And so have the conversation with pregnant individuals, and we have seen a lot of uptake of the vaccine among pregnant women, particularly among the healthcare worker sectors. And even though the women were excluded from the trials, pregnancies happen. So there are a number of women in any of the trials who did become pregnant during the clinical trial. And because those trials started last spring, babies have been born. And to date, there have been no reports of any adverse effects in any of the babies that were born to women that had been enrolled in the clinical trials to date. So I think that gives us some safety information as well. And in terms of breastfeeding, there's nothing, again, they were excluded from the trial, and so there is no data, but there is no reason to think that the current vaccines would cross into breast milk and cause any concern. So breastfeeding should not be discontinued during the time that mom is getting her vaccine.
Thanks, Linda. What about children? What do we know about children?
They're viral vectors. We know that. But beyond that, yes, you have two of them, you know. But I bet you this year that they have been less so of a viral vector, and that you haven't gone through as much cold and flu experience. So children, again, they were excluded from any of the original clinical trials that were done with any of the vaccines, but the trials in children are ongoing now. So we will have data regarding children and vaccine and the vaccination communities or populations and information for those specific populations by the summer. At this point, we know that the Moderna vaccine is recommended in 16 and above, and the Pfizer vaccine in 18 above. But we also know that again, the Immunization Advisory Committee has suggested that children between the age of 12 and 15, if they are in a high risk group, should be offered the vaccine. So we're already starting to vaccinate some children. We just haven't got vaccine information for very young children, but it's coming. And I expect by summer, we will starting to be rolling out those vaccine programs as well.
And I know there's lots more that we could talk about, but maybe we'll just do one final one, which is patients with autoimmune conditions.
Yeah, so autoimmune conditions is a really broad category of individuals, and the concern with an autoimmune patient population is that either the drugs that are being taken to maintain the control of that autoimmune disorder may interfere with the vaccine, or because of the immune dysfunction from the immune disease, that maybe vaccinations would be detrimental. And there is some carryover from other mRNA work where an accelerated or advanced inflammatory response to products might be experienced. But the mRNA vaccines are designed to mitigate that inflammatory response. So that is not an issue with the mRNA vaccines. And even though again, many patients that would fall into the autoimmune disorder group were not included in the trials, we have real world effectiveness data, and the vaccines are safe in that patient population. And even if we can't categorize exactly how much of an immune response they're going to mount compared to a counterpart person without an immune disorder, we know that there will be some sort of immune response, and that immune response to the vaccine will be beneficial. So again, patients or clients with an autoimmune disorder, that is not a contraindication to receiving the currently available vaccines.
Great, thanks, Linda. And maybe our last question about concerns related to vaccine. I know some people are talking about the long-term effects of this vaccine. And so what do we know about the long-term effects of vaccines in general and COVID-19 vaccination, and how should we address those questions? And I know Ayman alluded to this in the beginning, so I'll maybe toss it out to Ayman or Linda to comment on long-term effects of vaccines.
So maybe I'll make a few comments, and a few others want to complement. So in general, with vaccines, any adverse effect is occurring immediately after the vaccine, within the weeks after that. We don't have examples of vaccines that have long-lasting effects, that are adverse effects. And if you think about it, these are a 0.5 ml injection. You're really giving only a little bit of material that is designed to provide an immune response in a very short window. And most of the adverse events that you get are, as one of the panelists had mentioned, a signal that your body has responded to the material you've given it. So a little bit of, you may experience a little bit of fever, but that's because your body is taking action against the antigens that are now foreign and is mounting an immune response to them. We generally, and the trial follow-up, I think, is going to extend anyway for a longer period of time. And then also we're seeing a tremendous wealth of real-world evidence, if you like. It's harder to use that real-world evidence to assess efficacy right away. You need to let the program settle, but certainly adverse event reporting systems are functioning as they're designed to, and there hasn't been any signals, and there's been millions and millions and millions of people so far even vaccinated in the short term, and some of them are starting to accrue months after, and there's been no signals that have been reported to date.
Great, thanks, Ayman. Maybe I will shift our discussion and open it up more to the full panel, since we're getting to the end of this time and we want to ensure that we have time for questions. But maybe I'll just end by asking a question to the panel. And we've covered a lot of ground here this evening related to vaccines, vaccine education, and some of the issues arising. And I guess I'm wondering, what is your advice to pharmacists who are out there on the front lines right now, and how can they assist in increasing participation rates? And what advice would you give to people participating on the call tonight? And maybe Shelly, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think I alluded to it before, as did Anna and others, but I think that I loved actually how Anna said, way before we were immunizing, we were educators. So we've only been immunizing in this country for like 10 years or something like that, but we have been public health stewards without calling ourselves that. We've been health promotion advocates for decades. So I think that the biggest issue, I think Anna's hit it. Like, I think if we don't, we know that the single most common reason a person gets a vaccine is upon the recommendation of their healthcare provider. And we know that pharmacists are the most accessible healthcare providers. And we know that vaccine hesitancy is not insignificant amongst healthcare providers, including pharmacists. I mean, I think we'd be surprised that some pharmacists kind of want to take that wait and see approach. I'm just going to wait and see, how everybody else does with it. So I think we have to be comfortable, build our own confidence, build confidence in the people that we see. Again, I'm going to borrow from Anna's good points and just steal a bit of her thunder again and say, customize that conversation, meet people where they are, and do it now. Because even if we're waiting for supply, we're waiting to be able to actually immunize, the journey begins now. It began months ago. So I would encourage people to have those conversations. They can't always be presumptive, right? You can't say, so you're going to get your COVID vaccine today, but you might be able to say, I'm getting mine in 4 weeks, and then I'm going to be able to give you yours. I'm excited to see you back. So I think that's the biggest thing people can do, is embrace their role as a trusted healthcare professional who has these longitudinal relationships, who may be immunizing not just Natalie, but Natalie's husband, Natalie's parents. Sorry to pick on you, Natalie, but they have these sort of family relationships. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Thanks, Shelley. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, I can add a bit. Thanks, Shelley. I totally agree, echo that, those sentiments. And I would say we can also be proactive to help people where we think there may be challenges. So Ayman, you were talking about the side effect profile, and that was mentioned before too. If people have side effects, that might discourage them from coming for their second dose. But certainly we can talk to people about what to expect, and then we can help them to manage those side effects. So they can take acetaminophen, that can be recommended if they develop the side effects. They can be, we can be more proactive about other concerns that people might have that they might not be willing to, shall we say, be forthcoming about. So things like making the injections as comfortable as possible. So there's some good work coming out from the United States where they've surveyed the population. And my area, of course, happens to be, as you said, Natalie, pain and fear related to vaccination and the impact on vaccination compliance. And in different studies all over the world, we estimate that about 1 out of 10 people actually says that pain or fear of needles impacts on their decision about whether they're going to get vaccinated. And in some of the studies from the US, it looks like around 7% of people are saying they're not going to get the COVID vaccine just because of the fear of needles. And that's where people have actually asked about that question. Oftentimes we don't ask that question. And those kinds of things get buried under side effects of the vaccine. I'm worried about a side effect of the vaccine, and people aren't going to tell you that they're afraid of needles, because that doesn't seem to be a very legitimate reason for not getting a vaccine. So I think we need to be more proactive, patient-centered, and also set up the vaccines in a way that make it comfortable, convenient. And convenience with respect to vaccine hesitancy is more than just making sure that there are weekend hours where you can get vaccinated or evening hours. It means also setting up the clinics in a way that patients want. Patients want privacy. They want to be able to bring a support person. They want lots of other things that have to do with comfort and caring. And pain is kind of at the heart of that. So if you show people you care about their pain and their suffering, that goes a long way to building trust. So I think it's not just about all the facts we know, the technical expertise. Building trust is about showing people you're competent, but also showing them that you're caring. So we need to, make sure that we're incorporating those elements and we're building trust in vaccinations that way too. Thanks.
And I wondered if you wanted to just expand on that and talk specifically about CARD, and because I know you touched on elements of it there, and just maybe quickly summarize CARD and how you think it could be used maybe in a pharmacy setting to improve the vaccination experience.
Yeah, sure. So it won't take up a lot of time because I'm sure people have other questions, but in our work with public health, we actually developed a program as a framework. I would say I call it a framework for delivering vaccinations in a patient-centered way, which is really our goal anyway, is to be patient-centered. And we first approached this with thinking, okay, how can we make this comfortable for the patient and care about their pain and their fear? And the reason that we were focused on pain or fear is because we started this work in school vaccinations. And for any of you who were children yourselves or have kids, if vaccines come to school, it's a big event for anxiety and fear and fainting and all that sort of stuff. And that's often the time that when people have their first episode of fainting. So it's quite traumatic for a lot of kids. So we worked with public health to identify sources of what we called chaos or unhappiness with the vaccination experience. And through that process, of which for kids, pain and fear happens to be a very big part of, but we looked very holistically at how the whole program ran. And we found ways to insert things into the planning phases of vaccination and then the delivery of vaccination that could really reduce anxiety and make people feel more comfortable. And we call this program CARD. And each letter of the word CARDS stands for a set of interventions that you could do to make vaccination more comfortable. So C stands for comfort, A stands for ask questions, R stands for relax, and D stands for distract. So different people who are involved in the process are all playing their own cards, we say, to try to make it a better experience. So healthcare providers can do things to make the vaccination more comfortable. So providing privacy, for instance, might be a way to make people more comfortable with getting vaccinated in a pharmacy. Asking questions, what does that mean? That means inviting patients to ask questions about the vaccine or about whatever it is that's making them uncomfortable or anxious. They want to know something, so they're invited to do that. And often people won't do that on their own, so you actively invite them to ask questions. Or relax, there are interventions for relax, and then distract. And some of these things have to do more specifically with people's fears around the needle and how to get through that. But that's a framework where we can systematically look at the process of vaccination or how we plan to roll it out and infuse or insert opportunities for people to have all these different elements covered. And from just to give you an example of what you might do in the planning phases, you might send information or give information to your patients about the vaccine that teaches them this rubric or this mnemonic, so that they know more what to expect because they're invited to ask questions. Or if they are actually worried about the needle, then they might ask you about a topical anesthetic that they might want to apply or want to use. So it's kind of preparing everybody ahead of time. And I think that's an opportunity that we have, Natalie, that we haven't done before. But now's our chance to do this. Invite the patients, teach them ahead of time, like Shelita was saying, have those conversations, start early, and then you prepare the clinic to incorporate some of these things. And you won't just get people who wanted to get vaccinated show up. You'll actually increase the number of people that come through the door.
Great, thank you, Anna. That's helpful. I'm just going to turn it back to Shelly to add one more thing, and then I'm going to flip to a question we have from the audience.
Yeah, and I'll just be really quickly, Natalie, just thank you. I know time's running short, but one other thing, again, that Anna said that reminded me about vaccine confidence, and I think it's important to mention this and also to mention the resources, as we know that amongst racialized groups, amongst BIPOC, vaccine hesitancy is much higher for very legitimate reasons, for some people for different reasons, right? For mistrust of the healthcare system, lots of different complexities. I've had conversations with peers, colleagues who have said, I'm nervous about this. They may be reading the clinical trials and not sure that they're ready to take the vaccine, or they just may not have trust. So I think that having the conversation, and again, in a very shared decision sort of approach, and not taking a paternalistic approach, and understanding people's sometimes very legitimate reasons behind their own reasons for hesitancy is important. And Anna mentioned there are resources now available on the Public Health Agency of Canada's website. There is a vaccine healthcare provider toolkit that people can get, and you may be mentioning it at the end of this, but there's also a communications toolkit for First Nations groups, where they have, even elders, because sometimes people that, are going to be influential may not be healthcare providers. They may be people in your own community. So elders and others talking about why it's important to get immunized.
Yeah, thanks, Shelly. And I think the key point there is that, those interventions are most effective when they come from within the community, as you pointed out. So thank you. I have a couple of questions that I want to address that have come in from our chat. And one of them is specifically related to asking our panelists, how can we explain about mRNA vaccine technology easily to a member of the public to help ease their mind about concerns about mRNA vaccine technology specifically? So maybe Linda or Ayman, I'll let you try that one.
Ayman, do you have a good way that you typically explain it? I think of it as a photocopy, a little piece of a recipe, but I'll let you take a first stab, and maybe I can add to how you explain it, because you're the scientist.
Thank you. I always like to tell people your body's making mRNA all the time. So it's not material that your body's not familiar, and it produces it naturally. In fact, it's the first reading of the DNA is an mRNA. So it's happening right now as we speak.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the questions that I often get is the concern that because we're giving messenger RNA, that it's going to impact our DNA. So I think the really key thing that we have to explain to people, Ayman, and you can help me with this, is that when we give the messenger RNA, as I said, what we're giving is a little tiny piece of a recipe of how to make a specific protein that's only a little bit of the part of the whole virus picture to begin with. So the messenger RNA is a recipe for how to make a part of the spike protein that you talked about earlier. And once you've read the recipe, it disintegrates, and your body gets rid of that recipe. So the messenger RNA is only really there for a very transient period of time, and then it's gone. And it cannot get into our cell's nucleus, and it cannot get to our DNA, and it doesn't alter our DNA in any way. So in that way, it's a very safe vaccine. But I like to think of it as either, the wanted poster, you see the picture and you know what the person looks like when you see them the next time, but the poster can get wrecked in the rain and disappear, or it's the photocopy. It's the message, it's the recipe, but other than that, it just disappears and it doesn't really impact our system. Would you agree that that's maybe a way to explain it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what our body does to give to read the DNA. It makes an mRNA copy. It tells some machines what to do. There are these proteins, they get to work, and that message, like you said, disappears after that. So it's it's natural to our body, as part of our system, and I really like the way you described that, Linda.
Can I add something too, Natalie? I would say also, Linda, I love that analogy about the recipe card. And I think I would say, yeah, it makes this protein that's part of the virus, and then that protein is just released by the cell, and that the immune cells in your body recognize it as foreign, and then they mount the immune response. So you could get the real infection and you'd be exposed to that protein from the real infection. Here, we're just giving you, like you said, that one protein, not the whole virus. So it won't make you sick, but it'll be enough of a cue for your body to say, hey, there's something here that it's not supposed to be here, and then make an immune response. So hopefully that's an easy way, but I think that's a great analogy as a recipe card.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, everyone. I recognize we're in our last couple of minutes here, and the other question was that we wanted to address was where to find good resources, and we recognize that there's a lot of information about this right now, but what resources should we trust, or where should people go? And I think that's something that we're planning on providing some supplemental information for afterwards, and so we will do that. But maybe if we could just quickly, in 30 seconds or so, suggest a couple.
Public Health Agency of Canada, CDC, WHO. Those would be my top. And related to Public Health Agency of Canada is Immunize Canada, which is a at arm's length group that provides information for the public about immunization. Sorry, Linda, if you had anything to add, please do.
Nope, you hit the top three right off the bat there.
Great.
And keep checking back, keep them bookmarked and refer to them frequently, because the information changes, and that's one of the other things that as pharmacists we bring to the table is the current information and news.
Can I throw out a couple of more that are maybe a little bit more pharmacy specific, or even vaccine confidence specific? So 5 and 5 is a great resource from Kelly Grinbrod and her group, the University of Waterloo, and she's done some great things with myth busting and things like that. Also, 19 to 0 has really good language on how to talk to people, and they constantly are building toolkits and templates for how to approach a conversation in lay language. Because I think pharmacists, we get stuck sometimes, right? We want to know everything, of course, because we're pharmacists. And then we feel like we have to explain everything to everyone. And sometimes it's just pick one thing today that you're going to talk to that person. So I would encourage people to look at 19 to 0 because it does a good job.
I echo that one, Shelley. Absolutely, 19 to 0, and they have great infographics and tools as you suggest.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think that is a wrap. I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of our panelists for contributing to this discussion. I know we covered a lot of ground, so thank you for bringing your expertise here tonight. And I also wanted to take a minute to thank our wonderful team in advancement at the faculty for organizing this event, and really specific thank you and shout outs to Tara O'Leary, Laura Warman, and Susan Drodge. Without you, this would not have happened. Thank you all who came and listened to this event tonight. We hope that you found it informative and you've taken away some pearls that will be helpful as you engage with the public and your patients about COVID-19 vaccines. And then just one final comment that our next alumni and networking education series is actually next week on March 4th. So if you have some time over the lunch hour, I believe it's at 1 p.m. Mina Tadros will be speaking about the impact of COVID-19 on drug supply and utilization. And you can register on our website. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you all, and have a good night.